Hello everyone! For this week's review, let's talk about 1957's Not of This Earth, a science fiction film produced and directed by Roger Corman about an alien with a fatal blood disease who has traveled to Earth to collect human blood from the unsuspecting populace. For the past couple weeks I've been looking forward to talking about this movie, which was recommended to me a few years ago. If you have never seen it, I recommend checking it out even before watching the rest of this video. You can find it here on YouTube. It's only 67 minutes long. It's not HD, but the picture's fine, and while the audio can be a bit iffy, it's only noticeable with headphones, so I have included a link to that upload in the description below. I think this may supplant 1960's House of Usher as my new favorite Roger Corman film. Time will tell, but that's how much I enjoyed it. The screenplay was written by Corman regulars Charles Griffith and Mark Hanna, the music was written by Corman regular Ronald Stein, and all the featured actors appeared in at least one other Corman film. And of course, Corman himself was the driving force behind the whole thing. Roger Corman is an influential and prolific independent filmmaker with an extensive body of work. I tend to think of his filmography in three sections: the black and white sci-fi stuff of the 50s, the vivid post-cycle of the 60s, and then everything else. But I know that's a grave oversimplification. He's famous for being an extremely efficient director who could crank out a film at lightning speed, and his earlier films in particular are known for their low budgets, breakneck-paced productions, and occasional dark sense of humor. I must confess I'm not a huge Corman aficionado. I have seen a number of his films, 16 I believe, including this one, and my responses vary. So, going into this, I had a certain idea of what to expect, and I had a tempered curiosity, but I was pleasantly surprised. The film gets off to a great start with a cold open showing a couple teens necking in a convertible. The girl leaves after they exchange some wonderful 50s slang.
Don't be a drag. You know how you flip me.
I'm hip.
And you might be thinking, oh, it's gonna be that kind of movie. Okay, but hold on! As she walks away, she gets an uneasy feeling. She glances over her shoulder, nobody there, and then suddenly, cue the ominous music, she's met by a man with a briefcase wearing sunglasses. He removes the sunglasses, we hear a zorching sound, and she collapses to the ground. He starts extracting her blood and transferring it to an empty vial in his case, and then the camera pans over and tilts up to reveal, ta-da, his eyes. It's a great opener, but wait, it gets even better. This extreme close-up fades into a low-tech but impressive main title sequence in which evocative art reminiscent of a Rorschach inkblot test suggests eyeballs, blood spatter, and skulls. Yeah! Not of This Earth doesn't boast a large cast or big stars, but the actors give engaging performances, playing memorable and mostly likable characters. Paul Birch stars as Paul Johnson, who shows up at a clinic insisting on an immediate blood transfusion. As an alien, he's got all kinds of powers and abilities, but he's often overwhelmed by his struggle to get the acting human thing right. His accent is strange, his speech is stilted, his movements are a little awkward, and he's sensitive to loud, piercing noises. I found this weakness oddly endearing and oddly humanizing, and while Mr. Johnson is technically the antagonist, he's not unpleasant. He treats those he hires fairly well, and he's courteous. He just doesn't like interference in his plans.
I did not pay you to spy on me. Should you do so again, I shall eliminate you.
Unfortunately, the actor, Birch, hated everything about making this movie. The final straw was Corman's demand that he keep the miserable contact lenses in all the time. Birch got so fed up that he quit the film, and he never came back. A double had to come in and shoot the rest of his scenes. Perhaps his discomfort explains some of his stiffness, but if that's the case, it still works well for the character. Everyone else is very natural. The hired nurse, Nadine, is played by Beverly Garland with a breezy, confident manner. She's professional, but retains a playful bedside manner, as nurses often do. She's good at assessing a situation and figuring out how best to handle a difficult person, and most of the time, Her self-assurance makes her a strong protagonist. I like the way she reacts when Mr. Johnson locks her bedroom door. She doesn't freak out, as you might expect. She just calmly calls him back, asks for an explanation, and insists he leave the locking to her. She also does a pretty good job dealing with Jeremy, the hired man who takes care of all the other human things like housekeeping and yard work. As soon as I saw him, I thought, oh, that's funny. He reminds me of the guy who plays Seymour in The Little Shop of Horrors. Duh! Because he is the guy who plays Seymour in The Little Shop of Horrors. Played by Jonathan Hayes, Jeremy is kind of a goof, kind of a horn dog, quick to make a move on the attractive blonde, but Nadine keeps him in his place. As soon as he acts sleazy, she gives him a good hard slap. She's not messing around. He lays off after that, more or less, and they even end up being kind of a team as they wonder what Mr. Johnson is really doing and where his dinner guests have disappeared to. Other significant characters are William Roerich's good-natured doctor, who has no idea he has been ordered via hypnosis to keep mum about his research, so every time he tries to share his findings with anyone, the poor guy hits a mental wall. And there's Nadine's policeman boyfriend, played by Morgan Jones, who doesn't know that her special patient is tied to the unsolved murder of 13 bloodless victims. I enjoy how genial these characters are and how realistic their interactions feel. And of course, a major highlight was the surprise appearance of Corman regular Dick Miller showing up as a door-to-door vacuum salesman.
I represent the Airway Vacuum Cleaning Company. You the gentleman in the house?
This is my house.
Crazy. I'd like to show you the product.
He tries real hard to sell Daddy-O a vacuum, and it's a very fun performance. Too bad it's so short, but he definitely makes his mark on the film. And another quick but significant performance comes from Anna Lee Carroll as a fellow alien agent who has just arrived. What happens with her is one of the story's spookier developments, in my opinion, all of it implied, of course. The aliens' dialogue conveys a few details about what's happening on their home planet, Davana. The tidbits we get throughout the film are tantalizing hints of an intriguing backstory. We never get the whole picture, but we get enough to spark the imagination. Mr. Johnson has a machine hidden in a closet through which he can communicate with his boss, or rather his boss's floating head, played by the film's assistant director. Their dialogue is all telepathic, which is fine, and I bet that saved some shooting time. The only problem is that, especially on first viewing, it's very difficult to differentiate who is speaking. The cuts don't exactly line up, and as it turns out, according to IMDb, Paul Birch dubbed both parts, so it's easy to lose track of just who is saying what. The floating head gives Mr. Johnson his orders, and the discussion is so deceptively calm that you may overlook how sinister the plan is. This communication device doubles as a transporter, and Mr. Johnson is supposed to send a live human specimen through it. Well, you know, every good teleportation device in science fiction must have at least one freaky malfunction, and we get one. We don't see anything, which is a little disappointing, but if you use your imagination and put two and two together, ooh. This is not an ambitious film in terms of visual and special effects. It's even surprising how simple and modest it is, with most of the horror being implied through suggestion, dialogue, reverse shots, sound effects, and so on. The most emphasized visual is the close-up of Mr. Johnson's white eyeballs, and that focus definitely reminded me of 1963's X, the Man with the X-Ray Eyes, starring Ray Milland. That's a disturbing, thought-provoking, cautionary tale directed by Roger Corman. Hey! There's just one effect where things get a little ridiculous, and it seemed like a non sequitur to me. I'm talking about the rubber critter Mr. Johnson inflates. It's like a large, floating octopus pillow that makes little squeaky, squibby noises as it flies, and then it gloms onto its victim's head. Naturally, this ends up being another highlight of the film, though perhaps not for the best reason. It's commonly referred to as the Umbrella Monster, but my reaction when I saw it was, oh no! And we were doing so well! This unsophisticated prop, which the victim has to squeeze around his own head to clinch his own demise, is pretty silly, akin to the clumsy creatures that appear in Attack of the Crab Monsters and Creature from the Haunted Sea. At least they redeem the moment somewhat by having some fake blood seep out from underneath. That makes it a bit more gory, a bit more serious. The film has a tense, exciting climax. We get more eye-zorching, a good chase sequence, a touch of poetic justice, and then it's capped off with a nice little twist. Again, I really enjoyed this one. There were times when I thought it was genuinely creepy, and when it wasn't, it was still very entertaining. In 1988, Corman produced a remake of his own movie, but loaded with sex and nudity this time, and then he produced another R-rated remake in 1995. I'm gonna pass on those, I don't think they'd be to my taste, and I'm quite happy with the original. It may not have as much offbeat quirkiness as some other early Corman films, but the acting and the writing are enjoyable, and the whole thing comes together nicely. Calling it a diamond in the rough may be a bit much, but it's definitely a hidden gem. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think of Not of This Earth if you have seen it in the comments below, and come back next week for another review. Thanks for watching.